Welcome to APCUG's Wednesday Workshop, where we get together in the middle of the week to learn more about technology. This is the third Wednesday of the month, and that means this is Linux. We're going to learn more about Linux today. And today we're going to have a feature that we've had in the past, and I'm hoping that we will have a few more of these in the future. Because as we've learned through our Learning Linux workshops, there are a lot of different versions of Linux. And we all know why, because you've been attending our workshops, but not all of us know a lot about all these other ones. So today we're going to do another what we call our distro dive. And Alan German has volunteered that he's going to share some information about a Linux distro that's an old one. It's been around since the beginning that we haven't had a lot of information on because not a lot of people use it, or on the other hand, a lot of people use it that don't deal with us, I guess. So I'm going to turn things over to Alan, and he's going to be talking about the Arch Linux tree, which is out there, and talk to us about two different versions of Arch. So Alan, over to you.
Thank you very much, John, and good day, everyone. I'm actually going to tell you everything I know about Arch Linux.
That's more than I know.
Because I don't know very much, yeah, so we'll get right to it. Try and get right to it. Okay, as John mentioned, I took a look at Arch Linux mainly because one of the requests from the member survey a while back was to look at different distros, and I just had an interest in Arch Linux. I didn't know anything about it, so I thought I'd take a look. And then because John's always cajoling everybody to give presentations, I just put these slides together to tell you a little bit about Arch Linux. And if you've looked at Arch Linux and you've looked at some of the videos, you'll find that everybody says, I use Arch Linux, by the way. And I don't know what this by the way thing is, but it seems to be definitely associated with Arch. And I don't know if it's supposed to make us feel inferior or they think they're superior. I don't know. Anyway, I don't use Arch Linux, by the way. So if you have lots of detailed questions, you're probably not going to get very detailed answers. Arch is interesting. If you look at the website, it will tell you that it targets competent Linux users. So that means it's probably not for the mere mortals and monsters like me. But it does give you, it says, complete control and complete responsibility over your system. And again, if you've followed anything about Arch, you'll find it has quite a reputation. It has a reputation of being difficult. It's definitely a cutting-edge distro. Everything is bright and shiny and new. And the people that tend to use it are the more experienced Linux users, the so-called experts, I guess. And it's a bare bones distro. Everything can be added and customized, but you need the detailed knowledge to be able to do that generally. And in theory, you build a system from scratch. That's not strictly true these days. And it uses the command line, and it uses the command line a lot. In the good old days, it used it exclusively. But we'll find out that, again, nowadays that isn't the case. And there is an opportunity to try Linux and see how it works relatively easily. Historically, I'm pleased to report it's a Canadian invention, Canadian development. It's been around for 25 years. And initially it was developed by Judd Vinay from Vancouver on the West Coast. And interestingly enough, he also developed Pac-Man. So if you're thinking of the hockey puck running around eating gold coins, that's the wrong Pac-Man. This is the package manager that is used by Arch. And then since his early development, the The lead developer has changed a couple of times. As you can see here on the slide, there was a 32-bit version initiated, and then that was dropped in 2017 and then subsequently picked up again. So if you, I don't know who has 32-bit only computers these days, but if you do, Arch is one distribution that has a 32-bit version available. But down the bottom here is the important thing that in 2021, they developed a guided installation script. And so that makes it much easier to install Arch. And then finally here, you notice that it's community-based, and there's no company behind Arch as there is with some other distributions like Ubuntu, for example, or Fedora. In terms of the main features, most of us are probably used to using static point release models. You get a new version of the software every 6 months for Ubuntu, or every 2 years, 1 year, 2 years for Linux Mint, for example. But Arch, because it's up to the minute, it uses a rolling release model. So there are developments for the kernel and applications being updated constantly, and the ISO file is released very frequently, and the updates come thick and fast. And it can actually, some of the updates can break your system, I'm told, and so that can be a problem if you want a stable system. And it's a minimal install. I'm not sure it's that minimal, but you certainly don't get a lot of bundle software like you do with some of the other distros. A command line environment after installation, that's certainly true. And that's because by default, there's no window manager enabled and there's no desktop loaded. And again, that is really unusual for most distros these days. You would install the distro and you would have some form of desktop available in a GUI type environment. Anyway, we'll certainly see that in action as we go along here. They really like you to use the terminal, the command shell, and a text editor, and they don't typically provide graphical user interface type applications. And it's user-centric, so it's very much a do-it-yourself type operation. You can configure Arch any way that you wish. It's very general and very versatile and highly configurable. But again, you kind of have to know some of the nuts and bolts to be able to do that. So the first time I came across Arch was using distro C. I don't know if people have used this, but it's basically a website where you can check out a whole bunch of Linux distros simply by clicking on the appropriate icon. So if you click on the icon here for Arch Linux, then it basically loads a virtual Linux system running inside the browser. And this is the problem right here. It loads it, you get to right underneath the colored bar there, you get to a Linux prompt, and so you have to enter a command. So the question is, well, what next, right? So there's the difficulty of that command line interface. And you don't end up at a desktop. So you have to find out what's going on. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the Arch Linux website, and we're going to hit this download button here, and we're going to actually download the ISO file. And when we do that, it will take us to a mirror site. So we have to pick a mirror. I like to use the Manitoba Unix user group. I've been very successful downloading software from there. But there's all kinds of them, lots of them in the US, for example, as well. But essentially what you do is you get down to this page, which is the current ISO release of Arch. And you notice that they're dated. So this is February 2025 when I created the slides here. But basically the ISO will change every month in that rolling release type model. You get very frequent new versions of the new builds of the system, and hence a new ISO file. All right, so here's the original way that you would install Linux. You would go to the wiki, and the wiki is essentially a user manual for Arch. And there's all kinds of information there, and people will tell you to read the wiki if you need to be able to do anything. And one of the things it tells you is how to install Arch, and it basically does it, as you might guess, by a series of terminal commands. So you go through the wiki and you enter the commands one by one to install the distribution. That's the original way to do it. A newer way is to use this Arch install script, which is basically a kind of an installer, but not kind of as graphical as some of the ones that we've seen for, say, Linux Mint or Ubuntu Linux, for example. But if you you take your ISO and you create a live USB and you boot from the USB, then you will get this Linux menu. And so you can go to the first item here, which is install the ISO file, the 64-bit version. And when you do that, of course, you get lots and lots of Linux commands flying by on the screen. And eventually, the thing will install. And guess what? We're back to that command line that we saw with the Distro C virtual Linux install we had in the browser. So now we have to figure out what to do, right? So as I say, you have to go off and either read that wiki a bit more carefully or find somebody that knows what they're doing. And the reason I know about Arch install is because, or rather Arch, what's it called, Arch install script, and because I found this video on installing Arch Linux the easy way. And I don't know who this guy is. He's got this YouTube channel called typecraft.dev, but he doesn't actually say who he is. But he has this video which tells you exactly how to use the script. And so all you do is in the command line here, you issue the command arch install, because the script is essentially part of the Linux, the Arch distro. And as I said, what you're getting essentially is an install wizard, but it's more of a command line type wizard rather than a graphical user interface. So you get all these different bits and pieces that you can configure so that the installation runs in the way that and produces the ISO in the way that you would like it to. And again, there are a whole bunch of defaults, so you can do that too. One of the things I did was to change to a mirror, so a Canadian mirror, so when it does the installation, it picks up new versions of applications and system files, that kind of thing. So it has a location to go find those things. The next one on the list is disk configuration. And so we're going to choose the partitioning option here, so we can decide how Arch is going to be installed on the drive. And then you get into a series of sub questions. Use a best effort default partition layout. And that's my choice. That sounds to be the easiest way to do it, rather than try manually partitioning. Go with the simple route first is my first thing to do. And what it's doing is it's creating on the hard drive here. It's going to create the Linux distro, and I can choose the file system. And I usually stick with the tried and true ext4, and so that's what I've chosen to do here. The bootloader only seems to give me the option of grub, but that's fine because that's what I generally use. A root password. It's good to have a password for your root user, so we choose that, something that makes sense to us. And then we need a user account. So we're going to, again, we've got this series of sub-menus here. We're going to add a user. I'm going to use my regular username and password. And you notice that here it says, do I want this user, this user called Toaster, which is my regular username, do I want him to be a super user so that I can use sudo? And of course, the answer is yes. This is a test version anyway, but I want to be able to use sudo. So I'm going to make this user a super user. Normally, I wouldn't do that. Normally, Toaster would be a regular user, and I'd have the root user account for other things. But for these test purposes, let's just make this guy a super user to make it simple. And then the final thing, once we've set things up with the user ID and password, we hit the confirm and exit. So some of the other things we need to choose as part of the installation. We need an audio server. You've got a choice here between Pipewire and Pulse Audio. I don't think it really matters which one you choose, so I chose the first one on the list. For network configuration, it says use Network Manager, which is necessary to configure the internet graphically in GNOME and KDE Plasma. Well, I'm going to use a desktop, so I want to be able to configure things graphically, so I'm going to choose that, use a Network Manager. And then the final thing I want to look at here is the time zone. And you notice that in Arch, again, it's not a graphical type installer. So you don't get a world map to choose a location. You just get a simple list of time zones, which is essentially what you want. You want to set the appropriate time zone for your geographical location. Okay, so having gone through that list of all those different bits and pieces and chosen the ones that I want, I'm ready to install. So I can hit the install button here, and it runs through a bunch of commands, and then it stops and it says that at the top there, the specified configuration will be applied. Would you like to continue? Well, of course, yes, I would like to continue. And off it goes. And again, more and more commands flow by as always. And eventually it says, would you like to chroot into the newly installed installation and perform post-installation configuration? So there's a head scratcher. Is the answer yes, or is the answer no? And it turns out the answer is yes, because what we really want to do, or what we're going to have to do, as we'll find out, if we read the wiki, the reason we got to the command line and didn't have a desktop was that we didn't install or we didn't enable a display manager, and we need to do that in this post-installation phase. So here we have to say yes. And now we have to start using some terminal commands. So we have to, first of all, install the GNOME utilities. So we're using Pacman, which remember was the system installer. We're using -s, which is sync, which says install packages from the repository, the Arch repository. And you'll notice that when we issue that command, there's a whole raft of, it says there are 58 members in this GNOME group, and we can choose amongst them. They're all numbered from 1 to 56 there. And you notice that number 4 in the middle of the top line is GDM. GDM is the GNOME Display Manager. And that's the thing that basically gives us the ability to run a GUI desktop. And we've also got the GNOME desktop environment. We need that one too, and that's part of it, the GNOME desktop environment. So what I'm going to do is take the easy route out. You notice that the default is just to hit enter, which it installs everything. So let's just do that, because again, we're just trying to find out how to do things. And here's another one of these head scratches. It says resolving dependencies. There are 2 providers available for an emoji font. Now, I didn't know I needed an emoji font, but apparently I do, and I have to choose one of the providers. I've got no idea which one to provide. So again, I take the default, which is number 1 there, and don't worry about it because I don't use emojis anyway, but apparently you have to choose one. So let's take the default. Again, lots and lots of commands flying by until eventually we get to the end here, and it says installation completed without any errors. The log files are available. You can reboot when ready. All right, so to reboot, we need to issue a shutdown -H, which is the halt command. Shutdown -H and do that now. And that will basically shut down our installer and bring us back to that main menu from the ISO file. Well, notice now this time we have an option to boot the existing OS. So now we've installed the Arch onto our hard drive, and now we can actually boot the OS from the hard drive. So remember, we picked the grub as the boot manager. So we've got a typical grub menu. All we've done is install Arch, so that's all. That's really the only options we have. We're just going to do the first one, just boot straight into Arch Linux. And here's the very colorful login menu. So you see I have to enter my login user ID, which is Toaster, and my secret password, which is password. And I've kind of done that, but I'm still stuck at this command line. Now you remember that I said the problem was that we hadn't a display manager enabled. So we need to enable the display manager. And again, we have to look up how to do that. And it turns out you remember you needed sudo. We need sudo, and we need the system control command. We have to enable the GNOME Display Manager service, gdm.service. So we issue this command, and it says that we trust you received it, built in, and it's done it, right? So we enter our sudo password, and it created the symlink, and we're back to a command line. Now what we have to do, having enabled the service, we have to start the service. So again, we have to use a sudo command, system control again, this time to start the GNOME Display Manager service. So let's issue those two commands. And I might note, these are one-off commands. Once you've done this, next time you boot the system, you'll get here into the true, if you like, or the graphical version of the login system. So I think it remembers that I'm Toaster. I don't think I have to type that in, but then I just have to hit that guy, and now I've got the password screen. I can enter my password, and I can get into full-blown GUI Arch, which is a bit underwhelming. It's kind of a blank screen, essentially, a pretty blank screen, but a blank screen nevertheless. But you note that at the top there are some menu items. There's an apps menu and a places menu and some kind of dots with a rectangle menu. They must all do something. It turns out that there is some help available. You get this welcome to Arch Linux screen, and it's probably a good idea to take the tour and at least find out a little bit about how Arch Linux actually works. And if you do that, one of the things you will find is it says if you want to get an overview, whatever an overview is, an overview shows all of your apps and windows. And to do that, you have to press the super key. And you notice that it tells you, you poor Windows users, that the super key in Linux is the same thing as the Windows key on the keyboard. So if you hit that super key, then it shows you your apps and your windows and all kinds of good things. So you can see, for example, we now have two blue windows, so we have multiple workspaces. We have a search bar, so we can look for things if we knew what we were looking for. And down the bottom in the center, we have a dot which has a whole bunch of applications on it. So for example, the first one I checked was, here's a web browser. Let's click on the web browser. Let's enter opcug.ca. And sure enough, the browser jumps into action and displays the website for my computer club. So that's good, that works. The other one I look at here is Show Apps, this kind of waffle menu guy. And when you hit him, then you can see that you've actually got a whole bunch of applications already installed, bundled with the Arch distro, but fairly minor in terms of there's a weather app and clocks and maps and various things, but not a lot of choice. However, notice on that dock there's this little suitcase full of goodies. This is the link which takes you to the Arch version of the software manager, and that is this guy. And what it's doing is taking you to the Arch software repository. And there's lots and lots of software available in this repository. Everything you would need to do anything your little heart desires. You notice that it's just like the Mint software manager, which I use. It's got categories of software. It's got featured applications. And if we pick one category, let's pick the work category here, then we've got a whole bunch of different applications that we can install. And you notice one of the things we can install is LibreOffice. So let's select LibreOffice, and very typical type of result for a software manager. And just hit the blue button to install the software, let it whir around for a while. And then when you go back to that available applications screen, you can see that we now have Writer and Calc and Impress and all the other modules for LibreOffice. So let's run up Writer. And here's a text document, if you like. And you notice that, interestingly enough, when you run Writer in Arch, by default, it runs in full screen mode. But you notice at the top right-hand corner there, there's no little icons to minimize the window or make it into a window rather than full screen, or X to exit out of the program. Those controls don't seem to be there for some reason. That's either a configuration thing in the tools and options of Writer, I don't know, or it could be a problem with the theme that's being used in Arch. I've had this problem with scroll bars not displaying properly or not working as I expected when I've used the default theme in Linux Mint, and I've had to switch to a different theme. I use traditional green, and then the scroll bars have the arrows top and bottom, and when you click underneath one of the arrows, it just moves down rather than just moves down half a page or something, rather than moving more or less to where if you click 3/4 of the way down the scroll bar, it goes 3/4 of the way down the document, which I don't like. So sometimes it's the theme which is the problem, and I haven't used Arch enough to know what the problem is. So more research is needed for that issue. But you recall also that we had these menu items on the main screen, and the first one there on the left-hand side, that kind of horizontal bar with the dots, is the way that you get to the various workspaces, for example. So you could select a different workspace. The applications menu, this is like the main menu in some of the other distros. So you're getting a menu now which has got various categories, and within those categories, this one is displaying favorites by default, for example. So you've got whatever the applications available in that category are, and you can just simply click on one of those and it will run the application. So Arch, in this case, with this GNOME desktop, works pretty much like other distros as far as I'm concerned. It also has this places option, so you can go to different folders, for example, in the file system, or choose computer and go to other disks and partitions on your system. So it's pretty flexible there. One of the other programs that's available is the terminal, and in Arch Linux, I don't think you can get away by using graphical user interface applications all the time. I think you have to use the terminal. And one of the reasons is if you want to do a system update. As far as I know, the way to run a system update is to run terminal and then to enter this pacman command, pacman -syu, which is shorthand for run a system update. And when you do that, it gives you kind of a preview of all the packages, what it's going to update. Here it says it's got 278 packages to be updated. Remember, I downloaded the ISO, but this is a rolling release. So lots and lots of changes will have happened even since I downloaded that recent ISO file. And at the bottom here, it says, do I want to proceed with the installation? So of course I say yes. And it rushes off and generates all kinds of commands and installs things. And at the end, I can just say exit, and I'm outside of Arch Linux. Okay, so that's my quick and dirty version of Arch Linux. Now, one of the other variants on Arch is Manjaro Linux. Manjaro Linux is more like a typical distro. And so as it says here, it gives you the power and flexibility of Arch, but it makes it more accessible to mere mortals. So the thing about Manjaro against Arch is that it's a more user-friendly distro, and as I said earlier, it's more conventional. You get a standard type installer, a graphical user type installer. You have a desktop environment at the end of the day, and in fact, you have choices of which desktop you'd like to use. You have many more pre-installed software applications, more bundled software. And it's a more stable version of Arch because even though it's still using a rolling release model, the package updates get delayed, and they can be delayed by, in fact, up to 3 months. So I think that's part of this problem of sometimes updates will break the system. So maybe this is giving some time for the bugs to be worked out before you get lumbered with updates to your programs and operating system. The way I found Manjaro was this video from Explaining Computers. Christopher Barnett is a retired UK academic. I think I've mentioned him before here. He has a very deadpan style of delivery, dry British sense of humor, but really very well produced videos and very informative. However, in terms of Manjaro here, you might want to wait a little while because we're going to talk later on about some problems with Manjaro right now. And he has another video which might be more useful later on. We'll get to that. Anyway, let's get back to Manjaro. We go to the main website, and we'll just download the ISO file. But as I said, now we have a choice of which version of desktop we'd like to use with Manjaro Linux. So you can see here you've got the choice of KDE, XFCE, or GNOME. And if you go further down, you get into things like Cinnamon. Well, Cinnamon is the desktop I use with Linux Mint, so I'm much more familiar with that than anything else. So I'm going to choose to download Manjaro, the Cinnamon edition. And when we do that, we can again create this live USB, run it up, and it will tell us that we can boot with, and we can boot with open source drivers. Now that's fine for my system. If you have an NVIDIA card, an NVIDIA graphics card, you probably want to try the boot with proprietary drivers so that the distro will fit well with your particular graphics card. You get a usual kind of welcome screen, which you can bypass or go through the help files, whatever. But basically on the desktop, you've got this install Manjaro Linux icon. So if you double click on him, then it will bring up the graphical installer, which they called Wednesday, I guess it is. That's pretty appropriate for APCUG's Wednesday workshops. And this really is a typical kind of installer. You get a series of screens in an installation wizard. And here's the one where you pick the time zone from the world map, as you might do with some other distros. One of the interesting things is in Manjaro, you get a choice of office suites right off the bat. Whereas normally you might think you get LibreOffice, Manjaro gives you the option of either FreeOffice, which is a free and open source package from Germany, or you can use LibreOffice, whichever you prefer. Again, I've always used LibreOffice, so I would go with that. This is not a spelling mistake, as I thought it was, PAMAC. PAMAC is the Manjaro equivalent, Manjaro variant of Pacman. It's basically a graphical user interface on top of Pacman. So this is the software manager. So if you go through the various screens and pick all the options that you want, install the software, then you can restart the computer. And when you boot into Manjaro, now again, you've got the user ID. It remembers who I am, my name rather than my user ID in this case. And I enter the password, I think, and it gets me onto the desktop. Again, I've got that welcome screen, which I can turn off. But here we are in Manjaro Linux, but running the Cinnamon desktop. So Cinnamon desktop, we talked about this extensively, I think. I use it and John's used it. You got the menu button down the bottom there. You pop up the main menu. You've got all those installation categories. Here's the internet category. And by default, you're getting Thunderbird as an email client and Vivaldi as a web browser, which are, in fact, the two clients I use for those purposes. So I'm happy with that. And I think this is how you run the system updates in Manjaro. When you have the menu there, you can go to this Updates tab, and you can see that you have a list of available updates, which are checked by default, but you can turn those off and select which ones you want, and you can run it when you want. And it's it's very configurable and flexible in terms of when you want to run the system updates, which is one of the things I really like about Linux. I'm in control, not somebody else's operating system. Okay, so that's basically a quick overview of Arch, a quick overview of Manjaro, one of the benefits. And I said there was a problem. Well, there seems to be trouble in paradise for Manjaro. And I came across a couple of YouTube videos recently. This one says that Manjaro is falling apart. And this one says that Manjaro is about to change. And if you dig into this thing, what you'll find is that there are some indications that Manjaro has been in decline for quite a long time. It's one of these distros that's controlled essentially by a company and also essentially by one individual. So it's a German company called Manjaro GmbH KG, and the CEO is a guy called Philip Mueller. And some of the developers think that this guy has too much control and has business priorities which are overtaking the priorities for the distro as a community offering. There also seems to be some problems with the way that money is coming in and going out. And there are various technical issues which seem to be that bugs are reported but don't get fixed for a long time. So what happens is that developers have been leaving the project, and now there's been a major call for changes to the governance and how things are developed. And in fact, if you check here, there's a Manjaro manifesto, which was created by a group of these developers, and it goes through the issues and how they would suggest fixing it. So watch this space. I don't know what's going to happen here. But there are some alternatives. Manjaro is just one of the variants of Arch Linux, which is user-friendly. A couple of others, one's called CatchyOS, I think it is, and another one is EndeavourOS. And these are both based on Arch, but have a more traditional kind of distribution. CatchyOS seems to be really popular. If you go to DistroWatch and look at kind of fairly long term, the last year or so, the number of people that have looked at CatchyOS and all the other distros, it's been number one over a 12-month period. And Linux Mint is actually number 2. And Ubuntu is actually way down there at number 10. So both CatchyOS and EndeavourOS, which are the Arch variants, are on the list in the first 6 there. Notice that Manjaro is still number 8 whenever I did this. But there are different alternatives to Manjaro. So this is CatchyOS, just the desktop version. Don't know which desktop that is. And here is EndeavourOS, which is more of a kind of a splash screen before you get to the main event, I guess. So this both seem to be fairly colorful and useful distros. And I mentioned Chris Barnett and his explaining computer videos. So if you're interested in CatchyOS as the number 1 Linux distro, then this video, Arch Linux for All, is a pretty good overview and introduction to CatchyOS. Okay, so that leaves us with our summary of what we've talked about today. We talked about Arch, and we found that it's pretty well an expert-oriented system, or experienced user system anyway. It's not really beginner-friendly. That's certainly true, because you really have to dig into the internet to find out how to use the thing. It's not just like installing the ISO, having a desktop, and having a good idea of how to use it. You have to find out how to use a number of commands before you get to that point. The good news is, if you're interested, you're on the cutting edge of technology. Everything is up to date and bright and shiny, and it really is highly customizable. Although I'd argue that all distros are highly customizable. Manjaro is the more conventional version of Arch, much more user-friendly and more stable because of those long waiting periods for major updates. But again, I note that there are alternatives to Manjaro if that's what you're interested in, a more conventional version of Arch. And with that, I'm open to simple questions.
Lower the mic, lower the boom. Thank you so much with that presentation. That was good. And I will say to people that, you know, if you look into it, like with Distro Watch, you can go in and do a search for Arch-based ones, and you can find a whole bunch of other ones, such as the Arco Linux, I think, maybe. And a lot to try if you're interested in the cutting edge. I'm not so much interested in cutting edge, but there are people that are. Judy.
I'm going to go right to Murray Stone, who is going to have John get his hands connected to his arms and let him unmute himself.
You know what? They changed it again. Usually if you go right there, there we go. Oh, that's a change. Okay.
Fun and games with
Yeah.
Zoom.
Now there's just the icon, and then it says now you click it.
Now I got it.
Yeah. Well,
Finally.
It's not you, Murray. It's me, because Zoom changed their way. Used to have, when you go to your name, it would be a big box pop up and say "Ask to unmute." That box is not gone. There's
it comes up on mine, but
no, that's when I click what I find.
Yeah.
And so they hit it. So thanks to Zoom. So go ahead, Murray.
Okay, well, this is really just a comment for the great presentation. When you were having trouble getting your screen to unmaximize, I have a few things for you to try. Sometimes I find if I just click in the white bar at the top when it's maximized, it'll ask if you want to leave full screen mode. But then there's also, for LibreOffice in particular, there's Control-Shift-J or Control-Shift-F. Try the J first and then F, and that might let you unmaximize your LibreOffice screen.
Okay, thanks, Murray. I don't usually have that problem in Linux Mint. The controls are there. It would seem to be specific to that Arch Linux distro.
Yeah, well, that would probably work on that distro too.
If I was going to use Arch, I'd have to figure out how to enable those buttons within LibreOffice.
No, you just push the control button
work.
F, the Control Shift and F, or Control Shift and J, and that'll leave you'll leave the full screen mode.
Okay.
And Chris, your turn.
Yeah, Alan, you said you do not run Arch. Why?
Because
because a lot of us don't.
Well, no, but that's the point. It's like, is it all wonderful, or what is it that keeps you from going to Arch? Because it sounds like it's more configurable, or various things like that, or more up to date and things like that. What is it that keeps you from deciding, hey, this is better than what I run now?
Well, I'm not sure it is better than what I run now. I like a nice stable distribution, and Linux Mint does everything I want. It's basically an operating system. If the operating system operates, that's good enough for me. I'm not really concerned about being absolutely up to the minute. And what I read about Arch, and I don't know whether it's true or not, what I read is that updates can break the system. And if that's the case, then I'm not interested in having updates every 5 minutes and then having to try and figure out how to get the system back up and running. So for me, a stable, easy to use, does everything I want distro is the way to go.
Sounds like a good reason to me.
Arch Linux thing because John desperately wanted to know about Arch Linux.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Well, and for me, if you just have a single computer and an update conks it out, you've got a problem.
Yep.
It's even like with the Windows. When Windows, with that big security key that they have, when something gets all messed up, you've got to go to another computer to get to your Windows account to find that 25-digit code that you've got to copy and get to the other computer. So I have multiple computers, so maybe running Arch and having one that crashes and I can use another one to try to figure out, okay, now how do I fix it? But for me, I can do enough damage myself and have to fix, let alone have it just automatically go bad when it's update. And the other thing that happens with the Arch that I read about is that when new software comes out, they don't know for sure that it's going to be compatible with your current Arch, but you're going to install it anyway. And that's the thing, like with Mint, they're going to really wait and test out the new versions of software with the current Mint and the Mint that's up for development to make sure there's no problems. And I appreciate that because I don't need lots of extra problems.
Sounds like good reasons not to switch from Mint.
Yeah, but you'll get the Arch people to say, well, you're not a real Linux user unless you use Arch.
By the way,
yeah, go ahead, by the way. And I've been told too that if you go through a full installation of Arch, the bare bones way, when you are done, you will have a real understanding of all the inner works of the Arch Linux system, but some of us don't really need to know all the inner workings.
And I look at the Wednesday workshops as exposing the attendees to new things that they don't know about and they might want to try or not. And this kind of is don't try either one of these just for grins. Be serious about what you're doing. But that's the purpose of these, is exposure of, gosh, I never knew that existed. Maybe I'll give it a go, or it's too complicated for me.
Yeah, and that's why with the Linux open source, there are other versions like this Arco Linux, and there's another one that has a similar name. And these may be people who are trying to make the Arch Linux more stable for regular people. So, there are other options to try.
Tim, your turn.
Okay, offhand, Arch Linuxes, all the distributions, and I play around with several. They're bleeding edge technology. They don't do a lot of testing as they update new versions of modules that make up the Linux package. So sometimes what you end up with is a borked system. And it's also a case where Arch expects you to know more about Linux than the average person does. So an average Windows or Mac user would not generally want to touch the Arch Linuxes. RPM based like Fedora 43 and beyond, and OpenSUSE are much more stable. They're used by a lot of businesses, so that's a better choice. Everything else is based on Debian, which has Ubuntu, Mint, Zorin, and a whole bunch of others. Most of that stuff is checked out, especially by Debian's versions, very, very carefully, and it may be 6 to 8 months or more before you see that new update module in your version of a Debian, and going beyond into Ubuntu and Mint, Zorin, etc. So for most people, a Debian-based Linux is the easiest and best way to get in. If you're a little bit more advanced, you can do the RPM versions. Arch is right now gaining a lot of popularity for the Casio OS for gaming, but also there's Bazite based upon Fedora, which has good credentials as well. So there's a mixed camp there between the two. I would say that Casio gave me a good impression. So and some people are using it as their desktop everyday distro rather than just for gaming. The other thing is, and John touched upon it, and so I'm going to bring it up here too. There's a lot of people that are new to Linux. They use the simple, quick install. I call it the Easter egg. Why? Because it just installs and you got one big glob that holds everything, including your data, just like in Windows, just like in Mac. And the bad part is when something goes real wrong, you start having real headaches to try and recover your system. In Linux, my personal opinion, and I do it myself, is to use partitioning so that I have a separate root partition, a home partition, and now because of Flatpaks and those that venture into virtual machines, I break out in a separate partition the /var folder as well, because that's where it stores Flatpaks and also your virtual machines. In Ubuntu, snaps go in the home directory, but I can rebuild the root directory if something goes badly wrong and it doesn't touch any of the other partitions. I just rebuild it. I'm back in business within an hour.
Yeah, very good points, Tim. But to be fair to Arch, I will say, by the way, on their website, they do say that it is for, what do they say? Experienced Linux users, competent users, they said. So
Right.
They clearly make it clear that Arch is really not for beginners. And it
No,
really
it's
is for more advanced Linux users.
And if you don't partition, you really run into problems. But if you partition and you're still using Arch, you can rebuild the root directory and be back in business in a relatively short time.
Yes, I agree. And I use partitions, and then we'll just restore a disk image backup of an individual partition, and that takes minutes, basically.
I would add that I feel guilty at times because I've been using Linux for a number of years, and I get the feeling that I should be moving upwards. I should be moving up to Arch because I'm an experienced. Well, I'm not that experienced. I'm a user. But there are times when you read online and people save comments to videos. Well, you really need to move up to Arch. You played around with Ubuntu for a number of years or Mint. You need to move up to the real Linux. You need to move up to Arch. And I say, well, maybe
the plain Arch that Alan brought up, that was taboo for all but very advanced users. And because it was very hard to set up, there's no desktop in Arch, plain Arch. You have to add your own after the fact. But more recently, they now have pieces of software that make installing the base Arch much, much simpler, much straightforward. It's a breath of fresh air in that respect, but you still have to pick your desktop if you want it. Otherwise, it acts as a server-like, and all you're using is a terminal.
Actually, John, I would argue that you don't need to move up through Linux distributions.
Well, I
Linux
haven't.
is an operating system, so what you need is a distro of Linux that works the way you want it to work.
Yeah,
I play with many of them. My main is Linux Mint. I do have one Ubuntu version. It's called Ubuntu Cinnamon. It's a community build, and it's the only Ubuntu version I use. I have to support another user that uses KDE Neon, which is based on Ubuntu like Mint is. I use Fedora 43, and I use Gecko, which was a polished version of OpenSUSE. I have Garuda Arch. I have Manjaro Arch. I have Casio OS. And I did have Enduro, but I had a shortage of storage at one point, and it got sacrificed. But I'm looking to get Enduro back on one of my systems.
Murray has another question or comment.
Yeah, just a comment, really. It's about the move up to Arch. I would say that, yeah, if your life is Linux, yeah, then you should move up to Arch. But if Linux is only one of what I mean, I use Mac, Linux, and PCs. And as far as I might experiment with some of the other ones just to play around. I've done things like things with Alpine and other things, but really and truly, unless you are living and breathing Linux, if that's your prime hobby or whatever it is, yeah, then maybe you want to try Arch Linux. But I would ignore those things if you should move up to Linux or up to Arch, because after all, most of us aren't. Linux is not our life. It's mostly a tool, and sometimes we play around with it out of curiosity. But it's not. It's our life is not spent learning all the ins and outs of Linux. We learn what we have to do our jobs.
Yeah. But Linux is what I use. So,
Yeah, it's what I
it's not a
use.
game.
But
I'm
but
not a
it's
programmer or a systems administrator. It's maybe what you're thinking.
yeah, I use it, but I use it all the time. I've used it. Well, I started using Unix back in 1984, I guess, and I've been using um,
Do you need
variations ever since.
a word? Donna.
Okay, I'm trying, Judy. Okay,
You got it.
Yep.
thank you, everybody. I appreciate there's lots of versions. For most people who use a computer, it's email, it's, sending messages. It's very simple. And Linux Mint is a system that took care of Windows not updating. Very simple to use, and it works. So I appreciate the more advanced things, but for simple people who just want to get on the internet and have no problems and no headaches, Mint is very easy. So I'm happy I have Linux Mint, and I appreciate the more involved ones, but I don't have the time. I don't know if anyone else has time, but I can barely keep up with life as it is. So thank you, but I'm going to stick with Mint.
Right. And in the way I do a lot of my presentations about Linux is that it's just like the cars. Some people have time to go and try out all the different models of cars and the makes of cars to find out. But a lot of people, I find a car I like, I stick with it. So Donna, that's the same thing. You find it. I haven't played around with distro hopping for a while. I've just been pretty much, doing what I need to do, and I'm using, Mint. But I used to do a lot. And we'll all be making some upgrades this year, because I'll point out that this is April, and that is the month of the new Ubuntu coming out, the new long-term support. So that will be coming out shortly. And then all of the versions that are based on Ubuntu will follow suit in the next few months with their new versions. So this is going to be the big time for everybody, maybe upgrading and getting a new extended life.
Andy.
Hiya. Good presentation. I've looked at Manjaro, haven't looked at Arch at all, but Manjaro is one of the distros that's a rolling distro. I don't know how many people are aware of the rolling distributions. If you hate Patch Tuesday from Microsoft, and if you can appreciate what John was talking about with the updates for Ubuntu and the long-term releases, the rolling releases basically eliminate all those updates. And you don't have to have something like Arch or Manjaro that's at the leading or bleeding edge. There are other distros, rolling releases, that are quite stable. If you look at, for example, OpenSUSE, they have a stable release and they have a rolling release. You could run one or the other. You could take a look at both of them on DistroC. OpenSUSE, if I remember correctly, had some ties in with Novell one of the Novell servers got involved with OpenSUSE years ago. That was my first exposure to it. NetWare going over to Novell Enterprise or whatever it was. This is 20 years ago or something.
Yeah.
But if you go to DistroWatch and do a search for rolling release rather than a stable release, you can see Catchy is there and Endeavor is there. There are a whole bunch of them, and it eliminates whether or not, oh my God, I got another update I have to apply. As far as the applications, the Office applications, in particular LibreOffice, there's nothing that says that you have to keep LibreOffice that's installed with your OS installed on your OS. So, for example, if you're on a rolling release, you can get rid of the LibreOffice that's installed and install a Flatpak version, which is probably going to be more up to date, but guaranteed to run, or much more likely to run without any interference with your OS, and it doesn't have any impact on other applications. So
Thank you.
that's it. Thank you.
Murray.
I was just going to mention that on this laptop that I'm using right now, I'm actually running Xubuntu 2604 long-term release beta version quite well, which indicates that probably when it comes out in a few days, I'll get switched over to that. But I'm already running the pre-release, the beta one, which is working fine.
Thank you, Alan. You got some good conversations going there on to experiment or not to experiment and stay with what you're comfortable with.
Sounds good. Appreciate that, Alan. And we're going to do something different today. Now that we're done and I've thanked Alan, I'm going to stop his recording.